Welcome. I hope you've had a great first day at the eTech conference. Those of you in the back may not be able to hear very well. We've turned the speakers off towards the back third or so of the room. So if you want to come up to the front, that would be great. There's plenty of seats. Please feel free to come up. I have the pleasure this afternoon of introducing Chris Atchison. He's currently an assistant professor in the Department of Geosciences at Georgia State University and the director of the International Advisory for Geoscience Diversity. His undergraduate and master's work in geology and education was completed at Wright State University with a PhD in science education from Ohio State University. Dr. Atchison's research focuses on access and inclusion in geological field-based learning environments and creating experience-based learning opportunities for non-traditional geoscience students with physical disabilities. In one of his current NSF-funded research studies, Dr. Atchison took 6 mobility-impaired students into Mammoth Cave National Park. A continued collaboration with these students is currently informing the development of an alternative, synthetic, field-based learning environment in immersive virtual reality. He is currently expanding his work to other field sites, including an exploration of the structural geology of Montana. To increase the competitiveness in STEM industries, Chris's ultimate goal is to make the field of geology accessible to all students, regardless of physical ability. Please help me welcome Dr. Chris Atchison.
Thank you, dear. You're welcome. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many of you out there. Yeah, I think I saw one wave. I feel up here. I feel like Oprah. Now, thank you for all coming. You all get a free car, right? I'm afraid I only have business cards to share while supplies last. So, if that helps you out, then great. The title of my talk today, as you see behind me, is Perseverance, Regardless of Perspective and Ability. You might have seen a different kind of title that was out and about. We kind of worked with 2 different ones, but the one that was actually posted out there is good because it shows that I'm going to talk about physical disabilities in the geosciences, but this was a little bit smaller of one. To get into this, I want you to think about if you've ever woken up and thought, how did I get here? Now, I'm not talking about waking up after a night of bad decisions, but if you've ever woken up and you're well into your life and you're trying to think about how everything went stepwise to get you to that point. And it's about reflection and how you got there. And I've actually had to do a lot of that lately because from 10 years ago to today, I don't know how the heck I went from point A to point B, all right? I started off from as early as I can remember, I was going to be an architect, right? Weren't we all? We're all like, me and George Costanza, we were all going to be architects. But I think what it was pulling the all-nighters at my freshman year at military school that got me to the realization that architecture probably wasn't going to be it. But my love for nature actually is something that continued, and I was able to continue that in through my undergrad and my master's work in geology. How it got to the spin of where I am today is kind of strange because a lot of people ask, well, how is it that you're working with students with disabilities? And a lot of times, I really don't have a straightforward answer for them. I didn't grow up with a family member with any kind of physical disabilities or any kind of cognitive disabilities. I think a lot of it is the fact that when I was working at Ohio State University on my doctorate and working for the Ohio Supercomputer Center, I got interested in virtual reality with a really good friend of mine and collaborator, Don Stredney. A lot of the work that he's doing in virtual reality really kind of struck home with me. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to develop something combining my love for geology and my love for the environment and the simulations and technology of virtual reality. It just fascinated me. So working with my advisor at Ohio State, Dr. Karen Irving, as any kind of graduate student that comes in, she says, well, this is what my work's in. You're more than welcome to do, the same things that I'm working on. and I wasn't there. I knew that I had something else that I wanted to do. I was interested in something else, and she was so fantastic in helping me to extend my interest and follow my interest. So my interest at that time was cave geology, and I wanted to be able to make something using the technology of simulation and virtual reality to extend it to people who couldn't actually get there. And at the time, I was thinking more geographically. But I needed to find a population of students that this would work really well for, somebody who had maybe never ever been into a cave. And it became obvious that students with disabilities were where that all started. So my interest, from architecture to geology and all of the field environments that I've been in, it's kind of obvious that who wants to be in an office when you can be someplace like this, right? So I wanted to be able to bring this to the students. I wanted to bring these experiences to the students. And virtual reality was the best way to do that. So my plan was to use virtual reality to provide that atypical access to students who were not able to physically go into those environments themselves. So to who was that going to be? It was going to be those students with disabilities. Looking at the literature for this to kind of strengthen my assumption that this would be a good target population, looking at all the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, very, very few people with disabilities, with any kind of physical disabilities, are going into the STEM fields. Very few of them, and in the STEM workforce, there's even a very small percentage of those people that are actually working in the STEM disciplines. If we look at the geosciences, though, take a look at the date of this. 1996. 1996 is the most recent data that we can find for students with disabilities in the geosciences, because no one's collecting that data, and I'm pushing right now to have that happen with the American Geologic Institute, and we're getting pretty close. We're going to be able to collect this data here, hopefully this year. But from 96, almost 33,000 students nationally in the geosciences. 59 of them listed as, and keep in mind that this is, they self-reported this. It's not something that you can go out and ask, or these students had to self-report, but identified with some kind of a disability. Now, this doesn't say physical disability. This says any kind of disability. This could be a cognitive disability, too. So you see the very low enrollment numbers for students with disabilities. That's a problem. And that's why I wanted to go after that population. This was 6 days ago. I don't know, some of you might have seen the report come out of the White House from the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, the PCAST group. The problem that I see with this is that they're focused on diversity, but they're focused on gender, and they're focused on race. Not that there's anything wrong with that, right? But not anywhere in the document, and I think the document was 160 pages, not anywhere in that document did they say anything about disabilities. The good thing is that this gives me something to work with, and it gives us the opportunity to promote these students that actually need to be in these STEM fields as well. As a result of this report, the country is going to be looking for 1 million, and I don't recall out of how long a period of time this is going to be, but they're going to be looking for 1 million graduates in the STEM fields. All right, 1 million. So what does that mean? That means that there's going to be a lot of jobs that are going to be coming out. There has to be. Because right now, I have friends with STEM degrees that aren't working. So if they're wanting to push these STEM programs, to increase the size of these STEM programs, the jobs are going to have to come. Where are these graduates coming from? They're coming from your classrooms. So that's something that you need to be able to take back to your districts and say, the country's going to be looking for these. There's money. The president's already pumping money into these programs to build them. That means more scholarships, more opportunities for students into the STEM programs. All right, so my goal. So it's kind of funny. It's not really world peace. I just got back from a conference last week in El Paso, Texas, and it's on geology and this big National Science Foundation project that they're working on. And the very first thing that they said about this project was that we're going to save the world, and we all laughed, all right? But then they kept saying it, and our laughs got smaller and smaller and quieter and quieter. All right, so I find it comical that my goal is world peace. Well, it's not world peace. It's giving everybody a piece of the world, all right? And my wife made me say this. I'm sure she's I'm sure she's listening. I don't have my phone, so my text isn't going to go off saying nice, all right? So anyway, through the technologies of virtual reality, regardless of any kind of abilities, physical abilities, cognitive abilities, that's my goal. I want to be able to promote the fact that we've got this beautiful natural environment out there, and I want to give that to the students, regardless of the logistics that are involved. So here's my group. Here's my 6. These are 6 students from Wright State University. Fantastic people. And the biggest issue with this was when I started this study, I didn't tell them about what they were going to be doing. So if you can imagine, put yourself in their environment for a minute. And I come in, it's this guy they don't even know. I say, I'm doing this study, and we're going to go someplace in nature. I'm not going to tell you where we're going. Just understand that that you're going to be safe. Well, that's not enough. But the problem is that I could not tell them where we were going to go because I didn't want them going home and researching the place. So I didn't want to come out and say, we're going to Mammoth Cave and you're going to have a great time. Because then they would have gone to the computer, looked up Mammoth Cave, and learned all about it. Well, I was assessing their knowledge from before they went till after they went. So I didn't want them learning anything on their own for this. So I had to tell them as little bit as possible for this. And I tell you, they were all fantastic with it. My initial focus with these students was that the importance of field-based learning in geosciences. So at the secondary level, we all know that there's a problem with geology, that after 8th grade, most students probably don't learn about it at all anymore if they take an undergraduate course, a general education requirement course. But in the geoscience curriculum, learning in the field and actually getting out there and seeing is the biggest part of it. That's where your experience comes from. That's where your total understanding of the environment that we're in comes from. The problem with this is if you're physically impaired, this might not be a great opportunity for you. And quite honestly, through an assumption, most students are probably discouraged because of this. So not only from the physical barriers of it, most students face a lot of personal psychological barriers to getting outside into the field too, where you don't have a controlled setting. So these were my assumptions, my personal assumptions for this, the whole aspect of what we did. And some of them might be obvious and some of them might not be. Field sites are not easily accessible. A direct experience leads to a stronger understanding. That's something that we might think is kind of obvious. The last one is the biggest one, that a student's cognitive ability is completely independent of their physical ability. And so many people today, when they see somebody that's in a wheelchair, they go up and they treat them as if they're mentally disabled as well. And that became a big issue when working with these students. So since I wasn't able to tell them what they were going to be doing, the next best thing for me was to take the director from the Office of Disability Services at their school to the field site itself so that he could come back and he could say, yes, it's perfectly accessible and you're going to have a great time. Now don't ask any more questions. That's what I was hoping for, at least. So he took him down there, and this was his first opportunity to be in a cave himself because he is mobility impaired. And so right when we got down there, the first thing we had to do was put a headlamp on him so that he could, play the part. So he got in there, and it was an incredible experience for him and for us. So he went back, and he told the students exactly what they were going to get into. So real quick, the context of keeping in mind that all 6 of these students, none of them were science majors, okay? So I had the task of giving them some science content to be able to work in the environment, to do the activities that we were going to be doing in a very short amount of time. So you can see down here the content that we covered in 3 3-hour sessions before we went into the cave. I wanted them to be able to be confident enough with the stuff that they were going to be doing. So this was quite a challenge too, but we had a good time doing it. Mammoth Cave, if you've ever been down there, it's a beautiful place. It's only maybe 5.5 hours from here. If you've never been, go check it out. These were the 3 stops that that I wanted to make sure we hit on our trip down there. Stop one was the overlook, the sinkhole plain overlook. Stop 2 was in the cave itself, and then stop 3 was down at the Green River, where if you're looking at the entire system, stop 1 overlooks where all the water actually infiltrates into the ground. Stop 2 inside the cave is where the water's passing through to create the cave system. Okay, gravity fed, then stop 3 is where the water actually discharges into the Green River. It's the complete cycle, the complete system, and I wanted them to be able to see each one of those stops. So here's stop 1, the overlook. And as we're going along, I'm learning about what their limitations are. Okay? So at this stop, you can see that they're leaning over the railing because they couldn't see. Well, I didn't even think about the fact that that railing would actually be in the way. All right? And then also what you see here, let me go back. Also what you see here is that they're on gravel. Students in wheelchairs and gravel do not mix. Okay? Because the moment they got in an unconsolidated surface and those wheels started spinning, they become very, very panicked. Because if their chair is the only way for them to get around and the wheels are spinning and they're stuck, you've got that incredible fear of entrapment. This was a very big learning experience for me because, you know, when I went down to check out the area, I'm looking for ledges or anything that the chair would not be able to get up on. I wasn't thinking about sand or gravel or even hand railings that would get in their way. So this was a great learning experience for me. So another shot of the sinkhole plain overlook. The second stop was in the cave. They all got headlamps so they could play the part too. And they really loved the fact that once we got in there, we turned all the lights off. So the only thing that lit up the caves was their headlamps. They had a really good time doing this. And then the River Styx Spring at the Green River, where the river actually comes right out of the wall. Another shot of this. So back in the cave during stop 2, I didn't want them just going in there and looking and observing. They had to go in there and they had to play the part. I wanted them actually doing an activity that would resemble what geologists do when they're mapping the cave. This is a good shot. I like this because what we did was we separated them out into 2 different groups, the guys and the girls. There were 3 of each. It worked out real well. You can see here the girls, are very organized, very active. But my guys, they were typical, not so organized, but they got the job done. It was really, really good. And when we got back to the research center, they immediately started getting in and creating their maps from the data that they collected. And the map that they created was phenomenal. So what you see here, this is the actual map, thanks to the Cave Research Foundation. This is the map that they created. So section 1 here was from the girls, section 2 was from the guys, and you can see how perfectly this fits. These were 2 autonomous groups, and yet these 2 separate maps that they created fit perfectly together. And they even went so far as to draw the actual internal structure of the cave passageway itself, too. They gave me that. They wanted to give me as much detail as they had. So if you look from where they created this here, and it looks really close to the actual map that was collected by the Cave Research Foundation. I couldn't have been happier when I saw this. It was phenomenal. So as a result of all this, you know, we had a lot of great times. This is a couple examples of what they got out of it. I don't think they really understood what they were going to get into. I don't think they really understood the power that this was going to be. I had some of them saying, I wish I knew that something like this was available to me, because I might, if not majoring in it, I might minor in this, you know. And the second one down, you know, these are all pseudonyms, by the way, but the second one down was the moment that they got in there, they had to touch the wall. They had to realize that it was real. So it was really fascinating. But with the level of enjoyment comes a level of frustration too. The first one was really kind of about the sinkhole plane and the hand railing that was in their way. A couple of them had the really high-tech chairs that would actually elevate, which was really nice for that situation, but not all of them did. And the last two really goes to that fourth assumption that I talked about earlier, was the fact that just because they're mobility impaired does not mean that they're cognitively impaired. And they really felt like this when they were working with people outside of the research team. And this really became evident when decisions had to be made. And people who don't understand that when you're making a decision for somebody, especially for somebody who's mobility impaired, you need to include them in that decision. Because when you come up and you say, well, this is what we're going to do, because you're not actually including them in that decision-making process, they automatically feel inferior, that you've just made a decision for them without realizing what they're completely capable of doing. And that makes them feel completely mentally impaired. That was a big learning experience for me as well. And it's really helped me understand that even with a big project like what we're working on now, every step of the way I need to include the people that I'm working with. And when you do that, they give you anything and everything that you want. So what I want to show you here, let me go back to this real quick. So I'm going to show you a video of the trip itself. So one of my students, he's from a really small town nearby here, Pickerington. You ever heard of that place? Really small school, Pickerington. Jacob Brewer, he actually is a graduate at Pickerington North, and he's finishing his undergrad at Wright State, and he's going to be going on to graduate school. He's been visiting all kinds of different places. His dad actually came with him as his personal assistant on the trip, and they took a lot of video. And Jacob went home immediately, that same weekend that they got home, and he made this little movie trailer of our experience. And I want to share that with you now. I don't know how many times I see that, and it just gives me goosebumps every time I see it. It's just fascinating. They had such an incredible experience. This was a shot that was taken again by Jacob's dad that really kind of sums a lot of it up for me. This was an environment that the students never, ever, ever expected to get into. And once we were inside, it was just like an incredibly open world to them that they never expected, And so everything that we talked about, everything that we did, it's like they were just sponges that just soaked everything up. It was incredible. So what's next? So we've had this experience, and now the good thing is that this experience has actually moved on to allow me to secure some National Science Foundation funding. You remember back from my goals. My primary goal was to look at virtual reality and how virtual reality can open up this kind of an environment for people who physically can't get there. It took us 1.5 years of logistical planning just to get those 6 students in there. So now that we've secured National Science Foundation funding for this, I'm working still with the folks at the Ohio Supercomputer Center and the Advanced Computing Center for Arts and Design, both on Ohio State's campus. And we're actually recreating a portion of that cave system in virtual reality. So what I want to show you now is the actual cave demo. It's a 2-minute demo, and I'll explain as we go ahead. So if we can go ahead and take a look at this cave demo. So if you look up here, what I want you to keep in mind that this is an actual scan of the cave itself. This is not real. What we did is we used a LiDAR scanning technology to be able to scan the inside of the cave and then map over it the texture based on images that we've taken. So this is almost like a first-person perspective of actually getting through the cave. So if you have kids out there that are, like my son, always playing Call of Duty and shooting people, if he had an opportunity, he'd have somebody coming out, jumping out and shooting you. But this is it's that first-person shooter feel of a video game. But this is where we're at. This is the first time that this has actually been seen outside of our lab. This is the first time that I've shown it. What we're doing with this now is this isn't going to stop here. It's not going to be just a 2-dimensional view of actually moving through the cave. Students will actually have a complete head-mounted display on that they'll actually be inside of this cave, so that everywhere they look, all the way around them, they'll be inside of this. And they'll be able to interact with the cave walls. They'll be able to take measurements of the cave passageways, just like the students did when they were doing the mapping exercise, all from within the cave around them. Even though they'll be sitting in a lab setting, they'll be able to collect all this data from the cave around them. So we're pretty excited about that. And the beauty of that first-person light, like they have an actual headlamp on. And up at the top, you see, is the map of the cave with a dot that shows exactly where you're at. And the other beautiful thing about this is if we have students in wheelchairs and power wheelchairs, we're actually going to tap into the controls to where when they move forward with the control, the chair doesn't move, but their view will move. So they'll be able to actually navigate through the cave virtually through the controls on their chair. And we're going to also work with additional modalities for students who are even more severely impaired, using sip and puff technologies. If they're completely paralyzed, they'll be able to use sip and puff technologies as well to move through this. So that's where we're at with that. So what did I learn from all of this, from working with the students? The transparency of communication, like I was telling you. It's a whole new level of understanding when you have to plan for somebody and actually include them in the plans that you're providing for them, especially when you're working with students with disabilities who are always being told that they cannot participate. If you start to make decisions for them, you're going to get a lot of backlash, and they're not going to appreciate it much, and I can appreciate that. Individual needs. So there's 2 types of students, and I'm not going to go into this a whole lot, but there's a type of students that are very independent. They don't rely a whole lot on personal assistance. And there's a student who uses personal assistance daily throughout their day. And what I found, and I found very, very interesting on the trip even, that when students do not utilize personal assistance to make it through to navigate their day, they keep themselves confined into a very comfortable reality. So therefore, they're not going outside and they're not really adventurous and trying a whole lot of new things, because if they get themselves into a situation that they can't get out of, then they're going to be in trouble with that. But students who use a lot of personal assistance, they're a lot more adventurous, and they'll go out and they'll try new things. So I really saw that difference in the students that I worked with. And planning for typical fears with these students and unexpected events. The unexpected events, an example might be when we were at the Overlook and they got stuck in the gravel. That happened a couple of times in the cave as well, with very soft, sandy, unconsolidated sediment of the cave floor. Typical fears, a fear of heights at the Overlook. But what was also interesting, and this happens to everybody, a fear of heights inside the cave. Even at 300 feet below the surface, you can have a fear of heights when you look over a pit, and that pit goes on for 200 or 300 more feet down. You can still have a fear of heights from 300 feet below the surface. And the need for the multiple modalities, like I was talking about when we discussed the need for different levels of interaction with the environment, whether it be for power chairs or whether it be for the sip and puff technologies. Another thing that we need to consider is the fact that the head-mounted display might be too heavy for a lot of the students. So we need to look at different ways to present this information to them without that weight of the head-mounted display. So another way of actually presenting this information, this is the visualization wall at Georgia State University. You're looking at 48 different monitors. I think they're about 32 inches apiece. 200 million pixels of information in this visualization wall. It's very impressive when you stand in front of it. And it actually bevels around you. So when you stand in front of it, your peripheral vision is actually catching the monitors on the sides. So it goes completely around you. And this is an actual shot of the Montana field site that we're looking to extend the work into. So not only are we working with Mammoth Cave, we're actually looking at the actual field site that Georgia State University uses in western Montana. Another shot of it a little bit closer. The big problem that we're facing with this, though, are the beveled edges of the screens. It starts to detract away from what you're actually seeing. But when you stand back away from it, it's actually very cool. So I want to show a really quick fly-through through Google Earth of what we're actually looking to do, and I'll explain a little bit more of that. So just like you see on CNN, you might want to buckle up. If you puke, there's bathrooms back there. So this is in western Montana. It's a field site. The structural geology that we're trying to get them to do, or get them to understand, is all about the past mountain building episodes that we're looking at here. And you can tell by the terrain that students might not typically be able to get out into this part of the country. So what we're looking at doing is utilizing tools of technology that you might not actually have when you're out looking in these environments. So for instance, here is an actual map looking down on the same site that we just looked at. But the different colors represent the different types of rock. So Google Earth already has this. We can look at these maps with topographic lines already laid across of it. We can look at maps with different rock types and start to understand the surface, the structural surface of this just based on rock type. So what we're actually looking to do, and we've got a new NSF proposal out for this, is digging into this. So being able to pull up a complete sliver of what the rock lithology looks like a mile down. So being able to pull this up to look at the structural geology as it goes with it. So when students, this could be used for both students who are actually in the field on their handheld devices, or this could be used for students who are actually at the visualization wall to be able to interact with the field site without actually being there and collect the exact same type of data. As a result of all this as well, I've developed an organization that's still getting its way, getting started a couple of years ago, the International Advisory for Geoscience Diversity. It's a community of faculty, of geoscience faculty. It's a community of researchers, of instructors, and it's a community of students with disabilities. Because the problem that we're seeing is that when students show some interest and they get to a faculty member who has no idea about how to accommodate them, they're often very discouraged and they're not going to continue on. At Georgia State, we actually have 2 students that are working their way through the program. I'm very excited about that. But we need to be able to teach the faculty members about how to work with these students, how to accommodate them in their classrooms. And the advisory is actually doing just that. So if you would like, check out the website. But it's a building community of resources. It's a building community of experiences. And it's also a community of students who are physically disabled or cognitively disabled. And they might feel like they're out there all alone because so few of them There might not be several of them at one school, so they need to have a community where they can actually work with one another, even across the country or across the globe. And we have a few of them that are starting to do that, and it's actually very fascinating. So as another part of this is we're developing a workshop for geoscience faculty, working with students. So we're teaching these faculty how to accommodate them, and in the presentation of the workshop itself, we're actually utilizing students with disabilities to be able to say, this is what we need, whether they're blind or deaf or physically disabled or even cognitively disabled. This is what we need for accommodations. And with that, I would like to make sure that I thank my sponsors in the National Science Foundation and the Ohio STEM Ability Alliance. I'd like to make sure I acknowledge my co-collaborators at Ohio State and Western Kentucky University. Thank you all for coming. If anybody have any questions. The program of the virtual reality? Yeah, that's this whole sustainability model that we're hoping to attain. We're developing it now, but we're also looking at technologies that's actually going to be able to put it into classrooms. So that might be through thin client technologies or whatever, but we would house it at a supercomputer site, just like OSC, and then be able to pipe that out into the classrooms that they would be able to utilize from a laptop, with a head-mounted display, that they could utilize in the classrooms itself. So that's our goal. We'd like to see that happen. I think we're a little bit away from that right now. Once we get that developed, then we can start looking at how we're going to be able to do that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir? The trip itself? The trip itself was co-funded through National Science Foundation and OSAA, the Ohio STEM Ability Alliance. Ohio STEM Ability Alliance actually funded the participants, the students, so it took care of all the costs associated with the students. And the trip, the planning grant from the OEDG, National Science Foundation OEDG, funded all the other stuff. Okay, thank you very much.